The deadline for Maria's compliance plan loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. 28 days had passed since the hearing, and she had spent each one wrestling with impossible choices. The dermatology clinic at the base hospital had provided detailed information about laser tattoo removal procedures, but every consultation felt like planning the destruction of a memorial. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the civilian dermatologist contracted by the base medical facility, had been professional but direct about the realities of removing extensive tattoo work. The process would require 12 to 18 months of treatments, cause significant pain, and likely leave permanent scarring. Even with the most advanced laser technology, complete removal of colored artwork covering such a large area was not guaranteed. Staff Sergeant Santos, Dr. Hayes had explained during their first consultation, tattoo removal is substantially more difficult than tattoo application. The pigments in your artwork are deeply embedded and extensively distributed. We're looking at 18 to 24 treatment sessions, spaced 8 weeks apart. The timeline meant that even if Maria began treatments immediately, the process wouldn't be complete for nearly 2 years. During that period, she would endure regular painful procedures while watching artwork that honored fallen Marines gradually fade and disappear. Captain Rodriguez had helped Maria explore alternative compliance strategies, including partial removal or modification that might satisfy military requirements while preserving some memorial elements. But every option seemed to require sacrificing significant portions of the artwork that held the deepest meaning. Maria had also spent considerable time researching precedents for similar cases throughout military history. What she discovered was a pattern of service members facing impossible choices between personal identity and military careers. The institution that prided itself on transforming individuals sometimes seemed determined to erase the evidence of that transformation. On the 29th day, Maria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She requested a meeting with Colonel Patterson, not through official channels or with legal representation, but as a Marine seeking guidance from a senior leader. The colonel agreed to see her in his office that afternoon, away from the formal atmosphere of the courthouse. Colonel Patterson's office reflected decades of military service. Photographs from various deployments covered one wall, while commendations and unit citations filled display cases throughout the room. The accumulated evidence of a successful military career created an atmosphere of institutional authority and tradition. Staff Sergeant Santos, Colonel Patterson said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "I understand you wanted to discuss your compliance status." Maria had rehearsed this conversation countless times, but sitting across from the officer who held her career in his hands made the words feel heavier than expected. "Sir, I wanted to provide you with a complete picture of what my tattoo actually represents before I submit my final compliance plan." Colonel Patterson leaned back in his chair. "Staff Sergeant, we've already reviewed the evidence and heard your testimony. The board's decision stands regardless of additional explanations. Sir, with respect, I don't believe the board truly understood what they were looking at during the hearing. The photographs showed artwork, but they didn't show the stories behind each element." Maria reached into her briefcase and withdrew a detailed drawing she had created, showing her tattoo with annotations explaining each symbol and design element. She placed it on Colonel Patterson's desk, knowing this was her last chance to make him understand. "Sir, this section represents Corporal James Mitchell, 19 years old, killed by an IED during our second deployment. He was planning to propose to his girlfriend when we returned home. These symbols represent his service and sacrifice." Colonel Patterson studied the annotated drawing as Maria continued her explanation. "This area honors Lance Corporal Sarah Williams, 21, killed during a mortar attack while providing medical aid to wounded civilians. She died doing what Marines are trained to do, protecting those who can't protect themselves." For each memorial element, Maria provided the name, age, and story of the Marine being honored. She described their personalities, their dreams for the future, and the circumstances of their deaths. The clinical documentation from the hearing transformed into personal tributes that honored individual lives lost in service to their country. "Staff Sergeant," Colonel Patterson said quietly, "I can see that this artwork holds deep personal significance. But Military regulations exist for important reasons that extend beyond individual circumstances. Sir, I understand that. But I'm asking you to consider whether destroying memorial artwork that honors fallen Marines truly serves the spirit of those regulations. Maria had prepared for this moment by researching Colonel Patterson's own service history. His record included multiple deployments and command positions that would have involved losing Marines under his leadership. She hoped that shared experience might create understanding. Sir, you've commanded Marines in combat. You understand what it means to lose people under your leadership. This tattoo isn't about rebellion against military standards. It's about ensuring that their service and sacrifice are never forgotten. Colonel Patterson was quiet for several minutes, studying the annotated drawing and considering Maria's words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a different tone than during the formal hearing proceedings. Staff Sergeant, how many Marines have you lost under your command? 7, sir. Across 3 deployments. Their names? Maria recited the names without hesitation, along with their ages and home states. Each name was burned into her memory, representing not just a fallen Marine, but a life cut short and families forever changed. And you carry responsibility for their deaths? The question struck at the heart of Maria's post-traumatic stress struggles. Military leadership involved accepting responsibility for subordinates' lives, but combat operations meant that some of those lives would inevitably be lost despite leaders' best efforts. Sir, I carry responsibility for their lives and their deaths. Command responsibility doesn't end when Marines are killed. It extends to ensuring their service and sacrifice have meaning. Colonel Patterson stood and walked to his window, looking out at the base where Marines continued their daily training and operations. The sight of young Marines drilling in formation seemed to emphasize the weight of command responsibility. Staff Sergeant, 23 years ago, I lost my first Marine, Lance Corporal Davis, 18 years old, killed during urban combat operations. I blamed myself for months, convinced that different tactical decisions might have saved his life. The admission surprised Maria. Senior officers rarely discussed personal struggles or doubts about command decisions, preferring to maintain professional distance from emotional realities of military leadership. How did you deal with that responsibility, sir? Colonel Patterson returned to his desk and picked up a small wooden box from a shelf behind his chair. Inside was a simple challenge coin with Lance Corporal Davis's name and dates of service engraved on one side. I carry this as a reminder of my responsibility to the Marines under my command. Every decision I make considers the impact on their lives and welfare. Memorial recognition takes many forms, Staff Sergeant. The challenge coin represented a different approach to honoring fallen comrades, personal, private, and completely consistent with military regulations. Maria understood the implicit suggestion that her memorial needs might be addressed without extensive visible tattoo work. Sir, I respect that approach. But my tattoo serves a different purpose. It's not just private remembrance. It's a permanent commitment to carry their stories and ensure their service is never forgotten. Colonel Patterson studied the annotated drawing again, this time focusing on specific design elements that Maria had explained. The artwork was clearly more than decorative body modification. It represented a complex memorial that honored individual lives and service. Staff Sergeant Santos, help me understand something. If we required complete removal of this tattoo, what would that represent to you personally? The question forced Maria to articulate feelings she had struggled to express throughout the administrative process. The tattoo removal would represent more than compliance with military regulations. It would feel like abandoning fallen comrades and denying the personal transformation that military service had provided. Sir, removing this artwork would feel like erasing the most important experiences of my military career. These Marines died under my leadership, and honoring their service became part of my identity as a leader and as a person. But your service record shows continued excellent performance regardless of the tattoo. Clearly, you've found ways to honor their memory through professional excellence. Yes, sir. But the tattoo provides daily reminder of my responsibilities and commitments. It's not separate from my military service. It's an integral part of my understanding of what service means. Colonel Patterson was quiet for several more minutes, clearly wrestling with competing considerations. Military regulations required consistent enforcement, but the specific circumstances of Maria's case created complications that standard procedures hadn't anticipated. Staff Sergeant, what would you propose as a solution that addresses both your personal needs and military requirements? The question offered hope that creative solutions might be possible. Maria had spent weeks considering alternatives that might preserve the memorial aspects of her tattoo while satisfying appearance standards. Sir, I would propose partial modification that reduces the visible coverage area while preserving the core memorial elements. The artwork could be altered to ensure complete concealment under all uniform configurations while maintaining its essential meaning and purpose. What would that involve specifically? Maria had researched this option extensively with both Dr. Hayes and several civilian tattoo artists. The process would require removing some decorative elements while preserving names, dates, and core memorial imagery. Sir, we could remove approximately 30% of the decorative elements while preserving all memorial components. The modified artwork would be completely concealed under regulation physical training gear and would meet size requirements outlined in current policies. The compromise solution would require several months of painful procedures, but it would preserve the essential elements that honored fallen Marines while bringing her into compliance with military standards. The approach would also establish precedent for handling similar cases in the future. Colonel Patterson consulted his calendar and considered the proposal carefully. The deadline for Maria's compliance plan was tomorrow, and any alternative to complete removal would require official approval and documentation. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to recommend a modification to your compliance requirements. You'll work with medical personnel to develop a specific plan for partial tattoo modification that meets military appearance standards while preserving appropriate memorial elements. The unexpected decision felt like receiving a reprieve from an impossible sentence. Maria had prepared herself for the choice between military career and memorial artwork, but Colonel Patterson was offering a third option that honored both commitments. However, he continued, this accommodation comes with strict conditions. The modification process must begin within 30 days, and you'll be subject to regular progress reviews. Any deviation from the approved plan will result in immediate separation proceedings. Understood, sir. Thank you for considering alternative solutions. Colonel Patterson handed back the annotated drawing. Staff Sergeant Santos, 23 years of command experience has taught me that the best military leaders are those who understand the human cost of our profession. Your tattoo represents that understanding in a very personal way. The acknowledgement meant more to Maria than the practical accommodation. A senior officer had recognized that her memorial artwork reflected military values rather than challenging them. Sir, if I may ask, what changed your perspective on this case? Colonel Patterson considered his response carefully. Military regulations serve important purposes, but they must be applied with wisdom and understanding of individual circumstances. Your case forced me to consider whether blind adherence to policy serves the institution better than thoughtful accommodation of exceptional situations. The meeting concluded with handshakes and mutual respect, but Maria understood that her future remained conditional on successful completion of the modification process. The compromise solution preserved her career and honored fallen comrades, but it required ongoing commitment to a painful and expensive medical process. Over the following months, Maria underwent partial tattoo modification under careful medical supervision. Dr. Hayes developed a specialized treatment plan that removed decorative elements while preserving memorial components through selective laser application and skilled artistic modification. The process was physically painful and emotionally challenging, but the results satisfied both military requirements and personal commitments. The modified artwork remained invisible under all uniform configurations while preserving the names, dates, and core imagery that honored fallen Marines. 6 months after the hearing, Maria received notification that her case had been officially closed with satisfactory compliance achieved. Her service record included documentation of the administrative action, but no further restrictions were imposed on her military career. The experience had transformed Maria's understanding of military service and institutional flexibility. The organization that had initially seemed determined to erase her personal memorial had ultimately found ways to accommodate both regulatory requirements and individual needs. Colonel Patterson's decision established informal precedent for handling similar cases with nuanced consideration of individual circumstances rather than rigid policy application. Several other service members facing tattoo-related administrative actions received similar accommodations based on the approach developed in Maria's case. 3 years later, Staff Sergeant Santos was promoted to Gunnery Sergeant and assigned as a senior instructor at the Staff Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. Her modified tattoo remained a private memorial that honored fallen comrades while maintaining complete compliance with military appearance standards. During leadership classes, she occasionally shared her story with students facing their own challenges balancing personal identity with military requirements. Her experience demonstrated that the institution could evolve and adapt when leaders applied wisdom and understanding to complex individual circumstances. The young Marines she taught learned valuable lessons about the importance of fighting for principles while respecting institutional authority. Maria's case showed that military service could honor both collective standards and individual humanity when approached with courage, persistence, and mutual respect. Her memorial tattoo continued to serve its essential purpose, ensuring that 7 fallen Marines were never forgotten and that their service and sacrifice remained meaningful to those who survived. The artwork that had nearly ended her career became a testament to the possibility of finding creative solutions that honored both military traditions and personal commitments. The decorated Marine who had faced career-ending charges for honoring fallen comrades had become a senior leader who helped others navigate similar challenges. Her story proved that sometimes the greatest military victories were won not on battlefields, but in administrative offices where understanding and flexibility prevailed over rigid adherence to regulations. Maria Santos had kept her promise to her fallen Marines while preserving her military career, demonstrating that true leadership sometimes required challenging the system to make it better. The tattoo that administrators had once viewed as evidence of poor judgment had become a symbol of the institution's capacity for growth and adaptation when guided by wisdom rather than inflexibility. In the end, both the Marine Corps and Staff Sergeant Santos emerged stronger from the experience, proving that honor and duty could be served through creative problem-solving rather than destructive confrontation. Thursday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Maria's mood as she prepared for the continuation of her hearing. She had spent most of the night refining her written statement, trying to capture 12 years of military service and personal growth in a document that might determine her future. The pages felt inadequate to contain the complexity of her story, but they represented her best chance at making the hearing board understand. Captain Rodriguez met her outside the courthouse at 0800 hours, carrying a thick briefcase full of preparation materials. His expression was cautiously optimistic, though Maria could see the stress lines around his eyes. "How do you feel about our chances?" Maria asked as they walked toward the entrance. "We have a solid defense, but military proceedings can be unpredictable. The board has significant discretion in how they interpret regulations and apply them to individual cases. Your service record is exemplary, which works in our favor, but the visual impact of the documentation may work against us." Maria understood the implication. The photographs taken during yesterday's medical examination would show the full extent of her tattoo work, divorced from the context and meaning that gave it significance. To officers who had never served alongside her, the images might appear to support claims of excessive body modification. Inside the courthouse, Maria noticed that today's gallery contained more personnel than before. Word of the proceedings had spread throughout the base, drawing curious observers who wanted to witness how the command would handle this precedent-setting case. She recognized several faces from her unit, including Staff Sergeant Williams and Sergeant First Class Martinez, both of whom had served under her leadership during their last deployment. Colonel Patterson called the hearing to order at exactly 0900 hours. The formality felt heavier today, weighted with the knowledge that this session would likely determine Maria's military future. "We'll begin with presentation of evidence gathered during the investigation phase," Colonel Patterson announced. Major Morrison will present the medical documentation. Major Morrison stood and activated a projection screen behind the hearing board. Maria felt her stomach clench as the first photograph appeared. A clinical image showing her bare back covered with intricate tattoo work. The artwork that held deep personal meaning was displayed like evidence in a criminal proceeding, stripped of context and reduced to visual impact. As documented by medical personnel, Major Morrison began. Staff Sergeant Santos has extensive tattoo coverage across her back, shoulders, and upper arms. The artwork covers approximately 60% of the examined surface area and includes multiple colors and design elements. More photographs followed, each one showing different angles and measurements of the tattoo. The memorial elements honoring fallen Marines appeared on screen as anonymous imagery, their significance invisible to observers who hadn't shared those combat experiences. Maria watched the hearing board's faces for reactions, noting the subtle expressions of disapproval and surprise. The extent of this body modification clearly exceeds standards outlined in Marine Corps regulations regarding appropriate tattoo work, Major Morrison continued. The size, complexity, and coverage area demonstrate a deliberate choice to circumvent the spirit of military appearance standards. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes leaned forward to examine the images more closely. Major Morrison, were these photographs taken during a routine medical examination or specifically for this hearing? Sir, the initial discovery occurred during Staff Sergeant Santos' annual physical examination. Dr. Williams documented his observations and recommended further investigation. The detailed photography was conducted specifically for these proceedings. Maria's anger flared at the clinical description. The initial discovery made her tattoo sound like a medical condition rather than personal artwork. She forced herself to remain at attention, knowing that any display of emotion would be interpreted negatively. Colonel Patterson studied the images carefully before addressing Maria directly. Staff Sergeant Santos, can you explain how you believe this level of tattoo work would remain consistent with Marine Corps standards? Maria had anticipated this question and prepared her response carefully. Sir, the tattoo work was completed during authorized leave periods and was specifically positioned to remain concealed beneath regulation uniforms. At no time during my service has the artwork been visible while wearing proper military attire. The medical examination suggests otherwise, Major Morrison interjected. Dr. Williams' report indicates that portions of the tattoo would be visible during physical training or medical examinations. Sir, with respect, physical training is conducted in appropriate athletic gear, and the tattoo remains concealed during those activities. Medical examinations by nature require removal of clothing for legitimate medical purposes. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes consulted his notes. Staff Sergeant, the regulation doesn't only address visibility. It specifically prohibits excessive tattoo work that undermines military appearance standards. How do you justify this level of body modification within that framework? The question struck at the heart of Maria's defense. Military regulations were designed to maintain uniformity and professional appearance, but they also relied on subjective interpretations of terms like excessive. Her tattoo was certainly extensive, but it had never interfered with her duties or military bearing. Sir, the tattoo has not impacted my ability to perform assigned duties, maintain military bearing, or serve as an effective leader. My performance evaluations and peer assessments have consistently rated me as exceeding standards in all categories. Captain Rodriguez stood to address the board. Sirs, if I may present character evidence on behalf of Staff Sergeant Santos? Colonel Patterson nodded. Proceed, Captain. Staff Sergeant Santos has served with distinction for 12 years, including 3 combat deployments. Her record includes 2 Purple Hearts, multiple commendations for valor, and consistent superior performance ratings. She has successfully led Marines in combat situations and served as a mentor and role model for junior personnel. Captain Rodriguez activated his own presentation, displaying Maria's service record and performance evaluations. The contrast with the tattoo photographs was stark. One screen showed documented evidence of military excellence, while the other suggested violation of military standards. Additionally, Captain Rodriguez continued, We have prepared testimony from Marines who have served under Staff Sergeant Santos' leadership. Their statements consistently describe her as a professional, competent leader who exemplifies Marine Corps values. He began reading excerpts from written statements provided by former subordinates and peers. Each testimony painted a picture of a dedicated Marine who had earned respect through competence and character rather than rank or authority. Sergeant First Class Martinez had written, "Staff Sergeant Santos saved my life during our deployment to Afghanistan. When our convoy was ambushed, she maintained calm leadership under fire and organized our defensive response. She risked her own safety to ensure every Marine made it home. I would serve under her command again without hesitation." Similar testimonials followed, each describing specific instances where Maria's leadership had made a difference. The accumulated evidence painted a picture of a Marine whose service had consistently exceeded expectations, making the current proceedings seem disproportionate to the alleged violation. Colonel Patterson listened to the testimonials without visible emotion, occasionally taking notes. When Captain Rodriguez finished his presentation, the hearing officer addressed Maria again. "Staff Sergeant Santos, we've heard about your service record, which is indeed exemplary. However, this proceeding isn't solely about past performance. It's about whether your current condition meets standards for continued service. Can you help us understand your decision-making process in obtaining extensive tattoo work that you knew might conflict with military regulations?" Maria had prepared for this moment, but standing before 3 senior officers while defending deeply personal choices felt surreal. The tattoo represented her journey from troubled teenager to decorated Marine, but explaining that without sounding defensive or emotional would be challenging. "Sir, the tattoo was designed and completed during a difficult period following my second deployment. I had lost several Marines under my command, and I was struggling with survivor guilt and post-traumatic stress symptoms. The artwork serves as a memorial to those fallen Marines and represents my commitment to honoring their service and sacrifice." The admission of mental health struggles carried risks in a military environment that sometimes viewed such issues as signs of weakness. But Maria had decided that honesty was her only viable defense strategy. "The design elements include memorial imagery for each Marine who died under my leadership," she continued. "Their names, dates of service, and symbols representing their contributions to our unit. The artwork also includes images representing personal growth and transformation that military service provided. It serves as a permanent reminder of my responsibilities as a leader and my commitment to the Marine Corps values that saved my life." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes leaned back in his chair. "Staff Sergeant, if the tattoo holds such personal significance, why didn't you seek appropriate approvals before obtaining the work?" The question highlighted a fundamental disconnect between military bureaucracy and personal healing processes. Maria had obtained the tattoo during emergency leave following her unit's return from combat, when following proper administrative procedures had seemed less important than addressing immediate psychological needs. "Sir, at the time, I was focused on dealing with immediate mental health concerns and honoring fallen comrades. I researched current regulations and designed the artwork to remain concealed beneath regulation uniforms. I believed I was operating within established guidelines." Major Morrison shuffled through his papers. "Staff Sergeant, regardless of your intentions, the result clearly violates current standards. The question before this board is whether your personal circumstances justify overlooking those violations." The clinical framing frustrated Maria, but she recognized that emotion wouldn't improve her situation. The hearing board was tasked with applying regulations consistently, regardless of individual circumstances or motivations. "Sir, I understand the board's position. I'm not asking for special treatment or exceptions to military standards. I'm asking for recognition that my tattoo doesn't interfere with my ability to serve effectively, and that my 12-year record demonstrates continued commitment to Marine Corps values." Colonel Patterson consulted his watch. "Captain Rodriguez, do you have additional evidence to present?" "Yes, sir. We've prepared medical testimony regarding Staff Sergeant Santos' post-traumatic stress treatment and the role that memorial artwork played in her recovery process." The introduction of medical evidence shifted the proceeding into more complex territory. Military regulations had evolved to better accommodate service members dealing with combat-related mental health issues. But the intersection of those considerations with appearance standards remained unclear. Dr. Sarah Chun, the base psychologist who had treated Maria following her second deployment, took the witness position. Her testimony provided clinical context for Maria's decision to obtain memorial tattoo work. Staff Sergeant Santos was struggling with significant survivor guilt and post-traumatic stress symptoms following the loss of Marines under her command, Dr. Chin explained. Memorial tattoo work is a common and therapeutically valuable method for veterans to process grief and maintain connection with fallen comrades. In this case, the artwork served as an important element in her recovery process. Colonel Patterson asked, "Doctor, are you suggesting that Staff Sergeant Santos required this tattoo for medical reasons?" Not required in the sense of a medical prescription, but the memorial artwork served important psychological functions during her recovery. Removing or altering it could potentially trigger regression in her treatment progress. The medical testimony added another layer of complexity to the proceedings. If Maria's tattoo was connected to legitimate mental health treatment, removing it might cause psychological harm. But military regulations didn't typically make exceptions for therapeutic body modification. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes addressed Dr. Chin directly. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, would alternative forms of memorial recognition have served the same therapeutic purpose?" "Possibly, but the permanent nature of tattoo work provides psychological benefits that temporary memorials cannot match. The artwork becomes part of the individual's identity and serves as a constant reminder of their commitments and values." After Dr. Chun completed her testimony, Colonel Patterson called for a brief recess. The hearing board would deliberate privately before announcing their decision. Maria and Captain Rodriguez waited in a small conference room adjacent to the main hearing chamber. "How do you think we did?" Maria asked. Captain Rodriguez considered his response carefully. "We presented the strongest possible defense given the circumstances. Your service record speaks for itself, and the medical testimony provides important context. But, ultimately, the board has broad discretion in how they interpret and apply regulations." Through the conference room window, Maria could see Marines conducting normal base operations. Physical training sessions, administrative duties, and routine maintenance continued regardless of her personal crisis. The military machine operated with mechanical efficiency, processing individual cases according to established procedures. What happens if they find against me? Several possibilities. They could recommend administrative counseling, formal reprimand, or separation proceedings. Given the level of attention this case has received, I suspect they'll make a strong statement one way or the other. Maria understood that her case had become larger than individual circumstances. Senior leadership was using her situation to establish precedent regarding tattoo violations and military appearance standards. The personal cost of that policymaking process seemed secondary to the broader message they wanted to send. After 30 minutes, the hearing board reconvened. Colonel Patterson's expression was unreadable as he shuffled through documents and consulted with his fellow officers. The tension in the room was palpable as personnel waited for the decision that would determine Maria's future. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Colonel Patterson began, "this board has carefully considered all evidence presented regarding your violation of Marine Corps appearance standards. We recognize your exemplary service record and the personal circumstances that influenced your decisions regarding body modification." Maria felt her heart racing as she waited for the verdict. However, military regulations exist to maintain uniformity, discipline, and professional appearance standards that are essential to military effectiveness. Personal circumstances, regardless of their significance, cannot justify violations of established policy. The words felt like physical blows, each sentence confirming Maria's worst fears about the proceedings. "This board finds that your extensive tattoo work violates Marine Corps Order 1020.34H regarding appropriate body modification. The extent and nature of the artwork clearly exceeds standards for acceptable tattoo work." Maria struggled to maintain military bearing as her career crumbled around her. 12 years of dedicated service were being dismissed because of artwork that honored fallen comrades and represented personal growth through military experience. However, Colonel Patterson continued, we also recognize the exceptional nature of your service record and the therapeutic context surrounding your decision to obtain this tattoo work. Therefore, this board recommends administrative action rather than separation proceedings. The unexpected reprieve caught Maria off guard. She had prepared herself for career-ending punishment, not administrative action that might allow her to continue serving. You will receive formal counseling regarding compliance with military appearance standards. Additionally, you will work with medical personnel to develop a plan for either removal or modification of the tattoo work to bring it into compliance with current regulations. The conditional nature of the decision became clear. Maria could keep her career, but only if she agreed to alter or remove the artwork that held such deep personal significance. The choice between military service and personal identity felt impossible. Do you understand these conditions, Staff Sergeant Santos? Maria struggled to find her voice. Yes, sir. You have 30 days to develop a compliance plan with medical personnel. Failure to make satisfactory progress toward compliance will result in additional administrative action, including possible separation proceedings. The hearing concluded with military formality, but Maria felt numb as she walked out of the courthouse. She had avoided immediate separation, but the conditions imposed felt like a Pyrrhic victory. Keeping her career required sacrificing the memorial artwork that honored her fallen Marines and represented her personal transformation. Outside, Captain Rodriguez tried to offer perspective on the outcome. This is actually a favorable result given what we were facing. Administrative action is far better than separation proceedings. Maria understood the legal logic, but the emotional cost felt devastating. The hearing board had essentially told her that her personal growth, mental health recovery, and memorial commitments were less important than uniform appearance standards. What's involved in the compliance process? You'll need to consult with medical personnel about tattoo removal options. The process typically involves multiple laser treatments over several months. Alternatively, you might be able to modify the existing artwork to reduce its size or coverage area. The clinical discussion of removing artwork that honored fallen Marines felt like discussing the desecration of a memorial. Each element of the tattoo had been carefully chosen and positioned to tell her story and maintain connection with Marines who had died under her leadership. As Maria walked back to her barracks, she wondered whether the price of keeping her military career was worth paying. The tattoo represented everything the Marine Corps had taught her about honor, commitment, and remembrance. Destroying it to maintain her place in the organization that had inspired it seemed like betraying everything she had learned about integrity and loyalty. The next 30 days would determine whether Maria Santos, the decorated Marine, could coexist with Maria Santos, the grieving survivor who honored her fallen comrades through permanent memorial artwork. The military system that had saved her life was now demanding that she choose between personal identity and professional service. That choice would define not just her future, but her understanding of what military service truly meant when individual humanity collided with institutional requirements. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her dress blue uniform one final time before stepping into the military courthouse. The morning sun caught the polished brass buttons as she walked through the entrance, her combat boots clicking against the marble floor with practiced precision. After 12 years of service, she had worn this uniform to countless ceremonies, but today felt different. Today, she was fighting for her right to continue wearing it. The administrative hearing room buzzed with quiet conversation as various personnel filed in. Maria's case had drawn more attention than she expected. Word had spread through the base about the female Marine facing discharge over what the command deemed inappropriate body modification. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the curious glances and whispered comments from the gallery. Colonel Patterson, the hearing officer, took his seat behind a long wooden table. Two other officers flanked him, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and Major Morrison. All three men had served for decades, their uniforms decorated with ribbons and badges that told stories of deployments and achievements. Maria recognized the look in their eyes. She had seen it before in various forms throughout her military career. Skepticism mixed with barely concealed disapproval. Staff Sergeant Santos, Colonel Patterson began, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the thick folder before him. You understand why we're here today? Multiple complaints have been filed regarding your failure to maintain proper military appearance standards. Specifically, the presence of visible tattoo work that violates current regulations. Maria remained at attention. Yes, sir. The investigating officer's report indicates that during a recent medical examination, medical personnel observed extensive tattoo coverage that extends beyond approved areas. Is this accurate? Yes, sir. Her voice remained steady, though her heart pounded against her ribs. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes leaned forward. Staff Sergeant, you've served honorably for over a decade. Your record shows multiple commendations, 2 Purple Hearts, and exemplary performance reviews. Help us understand why you chose to jeopardize your career with unauthorized body modification. The question hung in the air like smoke from distant artillery. Maria had rehearsed this moment countless times, but standing here under the fluorescent lights with 3 senior officers staring at her, the words felt heavier than expected. Sir, with respect, the tattoo work was completed during authorized leave periods and was not intended to violate any regulations. The placement was specifically chosen to remain concealed during normal duty performance. Major Morrison shuffled through his papers. The medical report suggests otherwise. Dr. Williams documented extensive ink work across your back, shoulders, and upper arms. That level of coverage cannot be hidden by standard uniform configurations. Maria's jaw tightened slightly. Dr. Williams had been thorough during her annual physical, requiring her to remove her uniform top completely. The examination had lasted longer than usual, with the doctor calling in a nurse to witness what he had discovered. She remembered the shocked expressions, the whispered conversations, the way they stared. Sir, the regulations state that tattoos must not be visible in dress uniform. My tattoo work remains completely concealed when wearing regulation dress blues or service uniforms. Colonel Patterson removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Staff Sergeant, we're not here to debate technicalities. The spirit of military regulations is clear. Marines are expected to maintain professional appearance standards that reflect the honor and tradition of the Corps. Extensive tattoo coverage, regardless of visibility, calls into question your judgment and commitment to these standards. The words stung more than Maria expected. 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments, countless hours of training and leadership development, all being questioned because of ink beneath her uniform. She thought about the young Marines she had mentored, the lives she had helped save during her tours in Afghanistan, the respect she had earned from peers and subordinates alike. Sir, if I may ask, what specific regulation does my tattoo violate? Lieutenant Colonel Hayes consulted his notes. Marine Corps Order 10-20.34H clearly states that tattoos shall not be excessive in nature. The definition of excessive includes coverage that is extensive in nature or visible when wearing properly fitted physical training gear. Have any personnel reported seeing my tattoo during physical training or duty performance? Maria asked. The 3 officers exchanged glances. Major Morrison cleared his throat. That's not the point, Staff Sergeant. The regulation exists to maintain uniformity and professional appearance. Your extensive tattoo coverage represents a deliberate choice to circumvent the spirit of these regulations. Maria felt her patience beginning to fray. She had volunteered for every dangerous assignment, earned the respect of her peers through competence and dedication, and maintained impeccable standards in every aspect of her military performance. Now she stood accused of undermining the Corps because of artwork that no one had even seen during her years of service. Sir, with respect, the tattoo was completed during personal time and remains invisible during all duty functions. It has never interfered with my ability to perform assigned tasks or maintain military bearing. Colonel Patterson leaned back in his chair. Staff Sergeant Santos, the issue isn't just about visibility. It's about judgment. The decision to undergo extensive body modification demonstrates questionable decision-making that calls into question your suitability for continued service. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Maria had made split-second decisions in combat that saved lives. She had led Marines through hostile territory, managed complex logistics operations, and earned commendations for her leadership under pressure. Now her judgment was being questioned because of personal choices made during her own time. Sir, Could you please specify what aspects of my judgment are being questioned? My performance evaluations consistently rate me as exceeding standards in all categories. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes consulted another document. Your fitness reports are indeed exemplary. However, this hearing isn't about past performance. It's about whether your current condition meets military standards for continued service. The clinical terminology made Maria's skin crawl. Current condition, as if her tattoo was some kind of disease or disability. She thought about the artwork covering her back and shoulders, the careful planning and months of sessions required to complete it. The design held deep personal significance, representing her journey from a troubled teenager to a decorated Marine. Sir, may I ask if there have been any complaints about my duty performance or military bearing since the tattoo was discovered? Major Morrison shook his head. No formal complaints have been filed regarding your duty performance. Then, with respect, sir, what is the justification for these proceedings? Colonel Patterson's expression hardened. Staff Sergeant, your attitude is noted. The justification is adherence to military regulations and maintaining the professional standards expected of Marine Corps personnel. Maria realized her questions were being interpreted as insubordination. The system was designed to discourage challenges to authority, even when those challenges were reasonable. She had two choices: accept whatever judgment these officers reached, or continue pressing for logical explanations, and risk being labeled as having a poor attitude. Understood, sir. The hearing officer consulted his watch. Staff Sergeant Santos, we're going to require a complete visual documentation of the tattoo work in question. You will report to the medical facility this afternoon for photographing and measurement. The medical officer will provide detailed documentation of the size, location, and nature of the body modification. Maria's stomach dropped. The thought of standing in a medical examination room while personnel photographed and documented her tattoo like evidence in a criminal case felt deeply humiliating. But refusing would be considered failure to obey a direct order. Yes, sir. Additionally, Colonel Patterson continued, you will provide written testimony explaining your decision-making process in obtaining this tattoo. Include dates, locations, and reasoning behind the design choices. This testimony will become part of your permanent record. The bureaucratic machinery was grinding into motion, transforming what should have been a personal matter into official military business. Maria understood that once this process began, it would follow her for the remainder of her military career, regardless of the outcome. Sir, when is this testimony due? End of business tomorrow. The medical documentation will be completed today. We'll reconvene Thursday morning to review the evidence and hear final arguments. Major Morrison added, Staff Sergeant, you have the right to military counsel representation. I strongly recommend you exercise that right. The suggestion carried an ominous undertone. If senior officers were recommending legal counsel, the situation was more serious than Maria had initially realized. This wasn't just an administrative review. It was the beginning of proceedings that could end her military career. Thank you, sir. I'll contact legal assistance this afternoon. Colonel Patterson gathered his papers. Staff Sergeant Santos, you're dismissed. Report to medical at 1,400 hours for documentation procedures. Failure to appear will result in additional charges. Maria came to attention and executed a perfect about-face. As she walked toward the door, she heard whispered conversations resuming behind her. The gallery was full of curious personnel who had come to witness the proceedings. Some faces showed sympathy. Others displayed the kind of disapproval that came from those who believed military standards should never be questioned. Outside the courthouse, Maria pulled out her phone and called the base legal office. The clerk informed her that Captain Rodriguez could see her at 1,600 hours. That gave her 2 hours to complete the medical documentation before meeting with counsel. The walk back to her barracks felt longer than usual. Other Marines she passed offered respectful greetings, but Maria noticed subtle changes in their demeanor. Word had spread about the hearing, and she could feel the weight of their curiosity and judgment. In her room, Maria sat on her narrow bunk and stared at her dress blue uniform hanging in the open wall locker. 12 years of service had transformed her from an angry teenager with limited prospects into a respected Marine leader. The uniform represented everything she had worked to achieve: honor, courage, commitment, and belonging to something larger than herself. Now that identity was under attack because of ink beneath the fabric, the irony wasn't lost on her that the tattoo they wanted to document and Judge had been inspired by her military service and the Marines who had died under her command. The artwork told her story in ways that ribbons and badges never could. Maria changed into her service uniform and prepared for the medical appointment. In a few hours, she would stand half-naked while medical personnel photographed and measured her tattoo like forensic evidence. The thought made her feel sick, but refusing wasn't an option. As she walked toward the medical building, Maria wondered how many other Marines had faced similar challenges for personal choices that didn't affect their duty performance. The military's emphasis on conformity and standardization sometimes collided with the reality that effective soldiers came from diverse backgrounds and experiences. The medical facility's waiting room was nearly empty when she arrived. Maria checked in with the receptionist and took a seat near the window. Through the glass, she could see Marines conducting physical training on the distant parade deck. Their synchronized movements and uniform appearance represented the military ideal, individual identity subsumed into collective purpose. Staff Sergeant Santos, a young Navy corpsman, appeared at the entrance to the examination area. Maria followed him through a maze of corridors to a small examination room. The sterile environment smelled of disinfectant and floor polish. Medical equipment lined the walls, and an examination table occupied the center of the room. "Ma'am, Dr. Williams will be with you shortly. He'll be conducting the documentation procedure today." Left alone, Maria stared at the anatomical charts covering the walls. The human body reduced to clinical diagrams and medical terminology. In a few minutes, her own body would be subjected to similar clinical examination, her personal choices documented for official review. The door opened, and Dr. Williams entered, followed by a female Navy nurse carrying a digital camera. The doctor was in his 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His expression was professionally neutral, but Maria detected an undertone of disapproval. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Dr. Williams said, consulting his clipboard. "I need to document the extent and nature of your tattoo work for the administrative hearing. This will require complete visual examination and photography of the affected areas." Maria nodded, though the clinical language made her feel like a specimen being prepared for study. "Please remove your uniform top and undergarments. The nurse will ensure proper positioning for documentation." The next 30 minutes felt like the longest of Maria's military career. She stood in various positions while Dr. Williams measured and photographed her tattoo from multiple angles. The artwork that had taken months to complete and held deep personal significance was reduced to measurements, color descriptions, and medical terminology. The tattoo covered most of her back, extending across both shoulders and down her upper arms. The design incorporated military symbols, memorial elements for fallen comrades, and personal imagery that represented her journey from civilian to Marine. Each element had been carefully chosen and placed with specific meaning. Dr. Williams dictated his observations to the nurse, who typed them into a laptop computer. Extensive tattoo work covering approximately 60% of back surface area, extending bilaterally across posterior deltoids and superior portions of both arms. Multiple colors including black, red, blue, and green pigmentation. Design elements include military insignia, memorial imagery, and decorative patterns. Hearing her tattoo described in such clinical terms felt like having her personal history dissected and cataloged. The memorial elements honoring her fallen Marines were reduced to decorative patterns. The carefully planned design representing years of service became extensive body modification. "Are there any other tattoo locations I should document?" Dr. Williams asked. "No, sir. This is the only tattoo work." The doctor reviewed his notes and photographs before nodding to the nurse. "That concludes the documentation. You may get dressed, Staff Sergeant." Maria quickly put her uniform back on, grateful to cover the tattoo again. The examination had felt more invasive than she expected, transforming something deeply personal into official evidence. "The documentation will be forwarded to the hearing board by tomorrow morning," Dr. Williams said. Is there anything else you need to add for the record? No, sir. Maria left the medical facility feeling violated and angry. The clinical examination had stripped away the personal meaning of her tattoo, reducing it to measurements and policy violations. She understood that military regulations existed for good reasons, but the process felt designed to dehumanize rather than address legitimate concerns. The legal assistance office was located in an older building near the base headquarters. Captain Rodriguez was a young JAG officer with an earnest expression and a desk covered with case files. He gestured for Maria to take a seat across from his cluttered workspace. Staff Sergeant Santos, I've reviewed your case file, and the charges being considered. This is more serious than a simple administrative action. The command is pursuing separation proceedings based on failure to maintain military appearance standards. The words hit Maria like cold water. Separation proceedings meant they weren't just considering punishment. They were trying to end her military career. Sir, what exactly does that mean for my future? Captain Rodriguez consulted his notes. If the hearing board finds against you, they can recommend various actions ranging from administrative counseling to involuntary separation from service. Given the nature of the charges and the documentation being compiled, separation appears to be their preferred outcome. Maria felt the walls closing in around her. 12 years of dedicated service, multiple deployments, combat experience, and leadership accomplishments could all be erased because of a tattoo that no one had even seen during her normal duties. What are my options, sir? We can contest the proceedings on several grounds. First, we can argue that your tattoo doesn't violate specific regulations since it's not visible during normal duty performance. Second, we can challenge the excessive nature determination based on the fact that it hasn't interfered with your military duties. Third, we can present character evidence demonstrating your value to the Marine Corps. The legal strategy sounded reasonable, but Maria recognized the uphill battle they faced. Military hearings operated under different standards than civilian courts, and challenging senior officers' decisions carried significant risks. What's the likelihood of success? Captain Rodriguez hesitated before answering. Honestly, it's difficult to predict. The Marine Corps has been cracking down on tattoo violations as part of broader efforts to maintain traditional appearance standards. Your case has received attention because of the extensive nature of the tattoo work. Maria realized that she had become a test case, her career hanging in the balance while senior leaders made policy statements about military standards. The personal cost of their decisions seemed secondary to the larger message they wanted to send. How long do we have to prepare? The hearing reconvenes Thursday morning. That gives us tomorrow to prepare our defense and gather character witnesses. I'll need you to write a detailed statement explaining the circumstances and meaning behind your tattoo. Don't leave anything out. We need the complete story. As Maria walked back to her barracks that evening, she thought about the young woman who had enlisted 12 years earlier. That scared teenager had been running from a broken home and limited prospects, seeking structure and purpose in military service. The Marine Corps had given her both, transforming her into a confident leader and competent professional. Now that same institution was threatening to discard her over personal choices that didn't affect her ability to serve. The contradiction felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked to achieve. In her room that night, Maria began writing her statement. She started with her childhood in a rough neighborhood, the absence of positive role models, and the desperation that led her to a recruiting station. She described the transformation that military training had provided, the sense of belonging and purpose that had saved her from a destructive path. The tattoo, she explained, represented that journey. Each element had been chosen to honor the Marines who had died under her leadership, the lessons learned through combat experience, and the personal growth that military service had provided. It was hidden beneath her uniform not out of shame, but out of respect for military standards and professional appearance. As she wrote, Maria realized that she was fighting for more than her career. She was defending the idea that military service could transform lives while allowing individuals to maintain personal identity and meaning. The tattoo represented her story, and attacking it felt like attacking everything she had become. The next morning would bring new challenges as the hearing board reviewed the medical documentation and prepared to make their decision. Maria's fate hung in the balance. Her future depended on whether senior officers could see beyond regulations to recognize the human being who had served with honor and distinction. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same tattoo they wanted to use as evidence of poor judgment actually represented the best aspects of military service, sacrifice, honor, remembrance, and transformation. But explaining that to officers who saw only policy violations would require more than legal arguments. It would require them to see her as more than a regulation breach, more than a threat to military standards. It would require them to see the decorated Marine who had earned her place through service and sacrifice, not the ink beneath her uniform.